Welcome to the Designing Hollywood podcast in association with the John Campea Show. I am your host, Robert Meyer Burnett. The Designing Hollywood podcast show is dedicated to all things movies, the movie industry, and its talented professionals.
Hi, I'm Gilbert Musali, the new president and CEO of Western Costume, welcoming Designing Hollywood back to Western. You're at the biggest costume house in the U.S., the oldest costume house in the U.S. We've been around over 112 years now. We consider ourselves the one-stop shop for all your costuming needs here. With our two extra buildings next door, we're at roughly around 150,000 square feet. There are roughly 2.5 million costumes. If you need to get supplies, we can help you with that. If you need fabric, we can help you with that. Order fabric from around the world, anywhere you need. Deck out a full army if you want in our military department. Here's our supply store, catering to all your costuming needs. Thank you, Designing Hollywood, for coming in to see Western Costume. Hope to see you soon.
Today's guest is a talented costume designer from Regina, Saskatchewan, which will make John Campea very happy. She has worked on a wide range of projects, including Insomnia, Happy Gilmore, The Terror, Twilight New Moon and Twilight Eclipse, SCHMIGADOON, Hot Rod, Cats and Dogs. Where else can you make a Hannibal Lecter costume for a cat? An Unfinished Life, and many more. She's currently the costume designer for Percy Jackson and the Olympians. Without further ado, it is our great pleasure to welcome costume designer Tish Monahan to the Designing Hollywood show. Tish, it is great to have you here.
And I'm very happy to be here. I'm really looking forward to this interview on this project. I actually started in December of 2022. So
wow. Well, you know, I was just telling you, you just said something very funny. I was just saying to you that I really liked your work on Predator. And you made the crack that, oh yeah, I didn't know they hired a grandma to do Predator. But you actually have some pretty cool experience having worked on, I mean, I really liked the remake of Day the Earth Stood Still with Keanu Reeves that Scott Derrickson directed. You know, and I think that movie grows in stature after, as the years go by. I think at first people are like, well, how dare you make a remake of Day the Earth Stood Still? But that movie's it's a great film, and I think it's a great film. And you know, you've worked on other genre projects, even monster trucks, which I saw in the theater. But
wow.
I know, right? But there's a lot of, I mean, your background is pretty cool to have brought you to your new project. And I was just curious if you could tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get into costume design? I mean, coming from Saskatchewan, John Campea, my compatriot whose channel this airs on, is from Canada, so he loves it when I talk to anybody with Canadian ties.
You can keep on plugging the Regina thing, but truth be told, I moved to California with my family when I was 1.
Oh, I shouldn't have said anything. See, John's not gonna like that now.
But that's fun because I did go back there, several times on family vacations. But when I did resettle with my family in Canada when I was 12, we settled in BC, in the Okanagan Valley, and then I eventually ended up in Vancouver, which is where I currently live. But I just wanted to point out, I hadn't even seen a play until I was 18 and knew nothing really of the arts. I had always made things, despite, being a jock when I was in elementary school and high school. But I really, was just not that familiar with the performing arts. But I had a boyfriend who had graduated high school 1 year before me and had taken a theater history course at university and just suggested I take it because he had enjoyed the prof so much. So I segued into theater. It ended up being one of my favorite courses, that very first theater history course. So 2 years later, I switched universities and moved into a theater program and studied acting. So I was studying acting and directing. But even though I did really well at that, I discovered that once we were performing and rehearsal process was finished, that's where everyone is supposed to love, being on stage. But for me, that's when I started getting bored and discovered I liked the research a lot better. And I ended up switching over to costume construction and discovered the art of pattern making, period costume making, making corsets, crinolines, and really got into theater history. And after I graduated with a BFA and started working in theater, I knew I didn't know enough. So I went to a university on the East Coast and took a costume studies course. And where we learned, how to make everything properly. And I, learned dyeing techniques, hack making, working with colors, all of that, character research. And coincidentally, when I was there, I met another woman who was working in the film industry in British Columbia. And she said, listen, when you come back to Vancouver, get in touch with me. I did, and I worked on a very small film starring Bette Davis, and I was hooked. I loved it so much. So at that time, the industry was growing in BC, and I worked my way up. I had the opportunity to work with some really great American designers on bigger shows. And then when my turn came, to helm a small show, I grabbed it and really enjoyed pretty well every single show that I worked on. I mean, some far more than others, but I just really loved being able to do the character research, to apply the craft I learned when I was taking my costume studies course. That really helped if you've got a voice to add to understanding how costumes are made and working with your cutters rather than just saying, oh, I want this, want that, without, any kind of background. So I really think that having that costume making background helped me. And then I also had a personal love of portraiture, and I just felt that, being able to have that, abundance of pictorial research available once, the internet happened and Google Image became available, that you were just able to do your job much better than when I had first started.
Well, it's, going back into one of the fun things is always delving into people's past. And you before you became a costume designer, you worked on some pretty, in my bedroom, I had Daryl Hannah's face from Clan of the Cave Bear. I had that poster that's on the IMDb. And, that book you worked on all these projects that were derived from books, like the Twilight series, Percy Jackson, Clan of the Cave Bear was a huge book. Yes. I mean, not a lot of costumes in Clan of the Cave Bear.
No, not at all. A lot of furs.
A lot of fur.
I remember feeling, I was actually, I think, 7 months pregnant at the time. And
wow.
I was feeling a little bit nauseous around all of, now banned furs, but we were using a lot of rabbit furs in that film. But again, that was, I'd forgotten all about that. That was a long time ago. But
well, then I won't bring up Space Hunter Adventures in the Forbidden Zone from
oh my goodness, that was one of the early ones too.
Molly Ringwald. And
kidding.
and it had what Michael Ironside played,
Yes.
Overdog, what a
Yes.
great Canadian.
Yes.
So, and then you worked in a wonderful movie called The Boy Who Could Fly that was directed by Nick Castle.
That's right.
The great,
right.
great film. I know it's going a little too far back, but you know.
It is going a bit far back, but again, I do have. I mean, I believe that was in the. Yeah, my daughter was born. That was in the '80s,
Yeah.
and yeah, I remember. I remember distinctly what I was wearing some days on set. Yeah, that was no. It was fun. That was it was one of the first films where I worked with child actors, and it was great.
Yeah, and I mean, you worked on and all the directors too, like Joel Schumacher, who directed Cousins, which is a remake. I mean, William Peterson's in that movie.
I know.
And that movie was a perennial on cable. I must have seen it 100 times.
I know. That was a wonderful project, and
yeah.
working with him was just
And then I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about Insomnia, Christopher Nolan's first studio movie.
I know.
Across the street from Disney on the Warner lot over there. And, you know, here was a guy who was coming off of an indie film, Memento, which had so much, and it was his first studio picture. Yeah. And I would have to ask you, you know, what was that? Plus, you're not only working with Christopher Nolan, but you're working with two mega stars, you know, in that movie. And I mean, what was... And you'd been a costume designer. You'd been well established at this point, but you know you've got Robin Williams, Hilary Swank, Al Pacino, and then this new and up and coming director. That's a remake of I think it was a Danish movie, but what was it like working on something like Insomnia? Was that were you intimidated by that cast and Christopher Nolan? And
I was completely intimidated. It was, again, one of those moments, what the heck have I gotten myself into? But, you know, once you set your mind to the task of defining the characters and forget about, you know, these actors that are like gods, then, you know, you just move forward. And as long as you've got a truth to tell, then they'll go along with that truth. And but for me, it remains absolutely one of the highlights of my career. Even throwing in filming in Hyder, Alaska, where after filming, you know, we were all in Stewart, BC. But after filming at night, I had one of the only cars for the crew, and I'd have 6 people pile into the car. And we'd take the 2-mile drive across the border and go to the open bars in Hyder, Alaska, and get Hyderized, which was drinking essentially like grain alcohol, and then.
Oh wow!
No, it was, but of course not overindulging, but it was a real adventure. You know, filming, you know, close to a glacier, and and just being able to work with those acting icons was just something I'll never forget. And I had so much pride of just the memory of working with Christopher Nolan, because he just knew everything. Like any question anybody asked, he had an answer. It was almost like he was a physicist, a mathematician, a scientist. It was an amazing project to work on.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously it did well for the studio, and then the studio, Christopher Nolan became the golden boy at Warner Brothers after that.
Yes.
I mean, they because they were so happy with how that movie went, they offered him Batman Begins, and But I love your career because you've done so many varying. You've done comedies, you've done children's kids movies, you've done all these different kinds of projects in many different genres. Mm-hmm. Was that by design, or was that kind of where the oceans, the waves took you?
I think it was more like where the waves and the oceans took the projects that were coming out of LA that arrived in Vancouver.
Okay.
I think
that's the secret.
More like it. And I was building enough of a resume that I was able to be interviewed for the various projects that were coming to Vancouver. And of course, once quite honestly, working on The Day the Earth Stood Still and working on Insomnia opened up a lot of doors for me. And so I was definitely a bona fide consideration for a job.
Yeah, I mean,
And
that was, you had Fox and Warner Brothers in your pocket after that.
yes, yeah. And then after working on An Unfinished Life with Robert Redford and Jennifer Lopez and Morgan Freeman, it was anytime a show came to town, I definitely at least got an interview. And I think for that reason, I was able to build up a number of, different kinds of costume design credits in different genres.
Right.
And they were all, different and fun. I mean, of course, I mentioned in my bio my work on cats and dogs. Well, I loved it. You get to make a lab coat that you have to put your pockets, sideways for your Siamese cat walking across the screen. It's, just small things were very challenging and fun. And, we always had a lot of laughs working on that show.
So when you approach a series or a film, do you start with the script itself? Do you talk to the director? Are you thinking about the cast if the cast already exists? Where do you begin your design process?
The first step is a quick read of the script. This was my process. I read the script just to get my general reaction to it, to see if any ideas popped up. And then I would read it a second time in more detail, going into more depth. When I go to my first interview, I'm usually meeting with the director, maybe solo, or one or two producers, or in some cases like 8 people, which would be a bit intimidating. And then the first thing I would do is present my idea, at least on the the main like theme of the project. And then I would go into perhaps 3 or 4 main characters, that this is what I think, this is what I feel, but never totally definitive. You always want to leave the door open. And I've had some interviews where my thoughts were quite far away from what a director might have seen for maybe 1 or 2 characters, but they want to listen to your ideas. They want to find out why you felt that, and I think they want to know that you feel you can do the job.
Sure.
And then once, if you're lucky enough to get hired, then you have a more in-depth meeting. And then you find out what the director actually wants, so that you can go down, different roads than you might
Sure.
have chosen in the first place. Then you come up with more ideas that end up getting, pared down, and then your cast might not even have been selected at that point. Once the cast is selected, it's a whole other game, because they also have to have input in what they would like
Sure.
to be seen as. So it is an evolving creation, and it pays to be part psychologist, part charmer, snake charmer. I mean, you've got, because if you really firmly believe in something, you want to be able to convince others of
Right.
going down that road. But ultimately, the director wants what they want, which might be something you've convinced them of, and the actor needs to feel comfortable in whatever you've chosen to help them create a character.
Sure. One of the things that you worked on that I think is one of the best things that's been broadcast in the last 10 years is The Terror. And The Terror, based on the Dan Simmons novel. Dan Simmons is one of my favorite writers. I have every book he's ever written. And that series was just a knockout. Now, did you work on that first series, that first year?
I did not work on the first one. I worked on the second one.
That's what I thought. Which was also very cool, but that was not based on, they took it and they decided to turn it into an anthology show. But I thought you'd work in the second season. I was like, how are they going to follow this up? Like, they started based on Dan Simmons' novel, but the second series was incredible, very different than the first series, but incredible too. And what was that like for you to work on that series? And was that, you'd worked on another series that I really like, Wayward Pines. And so these were sort of, I think, ramping up to doing Percy Jackson.
Yes.
And so again, you're working on genre shows. What are some of the things working on a TV series that are different from working on film for you, or is there no difference for you?
Oh, I think there is a difference because I had primarily worked in film, and of course you have far more time to create. You're looking at having like 12 weeks of preparation and in-depth discussions with the director and the producers, lots of camera tests, like just lots of time to interact with the other departments, plan ahead for what colorations are going to be used in different sequences, making sure that the costumes are going to work well with the set. When I first worked in television, I was surprised at the speed with which you had to prep for something, because sometimes we would get an episode only at say 10 days before it was going to be shot. I'll just hark back to, Wayward Pines. Wayward Pines was different because they were in a universe that there were only limited supplies.
Right.
Clothing store. So, and there was a look that we created. Some of it, this is from my memory, where is a uniformed quotient, and then we have just the general population, but there was just very limited selection of clothing. So I wasn't too hampered by having to come up with something unexpectedly that was difficult for us to do. And I was really, really pleased with the look of that show. I was really happy with it. And then The Terror, we were given a little bit more lead time in terms of getting our episodes. We could read, we could assess what everyone was going to wear.
Again, another period piece going back to World War II, and
another period piece, and I really enjoyed working on that because it was completely period.
Yeah.
And so we had quite a vast selection of clothing, and we had the actors dress in clothing that we had rented that was original, but then if we couldn't find something, then we'd have to make something for them. So it was a real good mix of, let's say, 70% rental, 30% manufactured, and hunting for things that were like classic pieces, like Aran sweaters, for instance, where you find that the style of them really hasn't changed much over the years. But it was really interesting working on that, and it was having that, working within that horde, genre, which wasn't like, like blood and guts and gore, but more this dark foreboding spirit, and you know, you just had great empathy for the world that you know, the, you know, interred Japanese people had gone through at that time, and I was very moved by all of the pictorial references that were available, and you know, firsthand accounting by people that were still alive or their parents had been in internment camp. It was a very moving, and I thought a very kind of brave topic to touch on.
No, especially coming off that first season too. I was really impressed with how they made a huge pivot. But it was really, I mean, it couldn't have been more different, but it was so great and in keeping with the spirit of what they were doing.
Yes, I really liked that first season, which is why I, you know, decided to join the show, because I thought it you know, just had a lot of substance to it. And now they're doing a third season.
Yeah, I can't wait.
That.
I can't wait. It's so. So, which brings me to, you know, Percy Jackson and the Percy Jackson series, which is, they obviously, we'd had other Percy Jackson material. It had been adapted before. And this series was, you know, obviously a Disney Plus series, and there was a lot of excitement behind it. And to be honest, I went in when it first started airing, I'm like, I'll try it. But it was very apparent from that first episode, oh, this is great. Like, the cast is great, the design's great. I mean, tell us about how you got onto Percy Jackson, and what were your initial impressions, and how did you begin this process?
Well, initially I had been offered an interview and I turned it down, and it was only because I was thinking of retiring. I really didn't want to work, and
but they put you back in.
I know. I was then approached again, and I just said, you know, guys, like, I'm just not ready to do this. And I went out with two close friends for lunch, and one of them was my usual assistant, and the other one was my usual supervisor. And we were just meeting at a lunch and just, you know, doing a little bit of work chat. And I said, I've had this call about doing this series. I'm just not interested. And they both said to me, which one is it? And I said, oh, Percy Jackson and the Olympians. And they were like, what? And they said both their husbands were working on it. And I went, oh, God. I said, okay, well, I just turned down an interview 3 days ago, and I don't know if I'll be able to get an interview. But I called my agent, and
wow,
she said, are you sure you will do this? And I said, yes, if I'll have my interview, and if I'm lucky enough to get the job, I will definitely do it. But, you know, of course, I made my two cohorts promise me that if I got the job, they would do it. So that's what happened. So I had an interview with Dan Schatz at 7 a.m. I was leaving at 8 o'clock to fly to Denmark. So I'd gotten up early to have this interview. I didn't want to do the interview from Denmark. I only had a week to prepare, but I just thought, I just want this done now. I don't want to be distracted. I've got family there. It was going to be over Christmas. And this is actually in December of 21. I was mistaken before when I said 22. December of 21. I had the interview with Dan. I flew off to Denmark, and I heard, I think, the middle of January that I had the job. I had to have another interview when I was in Denmark from a hotel room, sending my husband back. And this is all during COVID, sending my husband back to Vancouver. And because I hadn't met John Steinberg, I hadn't met James Baldwin. So I had the interview with the three of them, and we just chatted. And then, I heard about a week later that I had, the job. And I was super excited about it. My approach, which in my interview, which is what I had done, was like just to go to the original source material. I had quickly seen Percy Jackson and the Olympians, the movie, but was told not to pay any attention to that because it hadn't really paid much attention to the book.
Right.
And that I was to pattern everything on the book. But I had told them that I did want to go to original source material, like, you know, look at imagery of you know, Greek gods and you know, just pay attention to that, and then come up with my own ideas and be as, you know, historically accurate as I could be within the realm of a fantasy modern day camp, you know, in the woods that had quasi Greek armor. But what I was told was always go back to the book. So I had read the book and I had the illustrated copy of the book, and that's what I did. Whenever I had, you know, any kind of question, I would just go to the descriptions in the book and look at the illustrations, see if I could, you know, come up with a realistic portrayal of that, and just targeted the characters in that manner. And I happily had lots of time for research. I believe I had 12 weeks prep.
Wow.
And which was wonderful. So I really had time to focus on what I wanted to do with those individual characters.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, you know, the books are, sorry, I'm interrupt you, but
yeah.
with the research, you know, you've got a 21st century depiction. It's modern day, but yet you're harking back to antiquity. So when they said, go look at the books and you were doing your research, did you have like, where did you look for things like depictions of the Greek gods, or did you go and look into certain kinds of artwork throughout history, or?
I looked.
Or was there a period, or was there a particular artist or a particular place?
No, I looked at museum collections. I looked at Greek pottery. I looked at, you know, just renditions. Sometimes there would be, you know, an exploration of, you know, the classical look, even in the 14th and 15th century. But I went back to antiquity and looked at the original collections of all of the armor, depictions of clothing on, you know, vases. I, you know, just really wanted, because this is all about the Greek gods, so I just wanted to immerse myself in that world, and then, you know, come up with ideas for outfitting 250 kids at a camp,
right,
in armor that wasn't quite one size fits all, but two sizes fits all.
Sure.
You know, I had to make it adjustable in different ways, and that's why I'm so glad that I had my background in costume construction, because I came up with what I feel were a really, you know, a really good set of ideas for adaptation.
Yeah, I mean, the show looks great. Now, when you're coordinating with the production designer and the director of photography and for the overall look, the show has a great overall look to it. Were you coordinating? I mean, as you're designing armor, how light would play off it, for instance, in terms of photography and how they wanted to make things look. So were you also coordinating with the different department heads on the overall look of the show?
Absolutely. I worked very, very closely with Pierre, the cinematographer, at the very beginning, because we had this kind of wealth of time. He was also there when I, you know, in the 12-week prep. So one of the big issues was going to be trying to determine that color of orange.
Right.
For, like, you know, the orange t-shirts, because it, you know, it just appears in so many different types of light. and you're manufacturing this for like a large group of kids, so it absolutely had to be right. So I did a lot of camera tests just of different colors and how they would work in a forested environment, how they would work in a sunny environment, how they would work in an interior, all of that. I tested all different kinds of blues, greens, yellows, lilacs, just throughout. Like we had racks of things that we tested to hone in on the colors for the actors, and then even just to work with our three leads who were going to be, traveling as a trio.
Right.
And they're going to be traveling again in those same kinds of geographical locations I just depicted, as well as going into the Las Vegas set, which is, like brightly lit and with saturated colors. And then into the underworld, which is all, kind of gloomy and gray. And so you have to be very careful about picking what those three actors were going to wear.
Sure.
And I had to choose things that would work, well with the three of them together.
Had they already been cast?
No.
Okay.
Walker had been.
He had been.
Walker had been, but the others hadn't. And so I had to keep an open mind. But they were cast, I think, 6 or 7 weeks out. I got confirmation on it. But we made everything for those kids. Like we made. Well, first of all, I just want to step back a bit. Like I had a world of gray, and I would find out from the production designer, what are the colors going to be in this area? What are we going to be using in this area? What are we going to be using in this area? And then I knew I wanted to put Percy in a plaid shirt. Like I knew that much. But I was, carefully working out what colors am I going to put the others in. And I kept, I cut little pieces of paper. It's almost like on toothpicks, and I would have them, traveling around into different areas. Unfortunately, the production design department already had vast, input for what those colors of those worlds were going to be. So I just got big printouts, and I had my little, bits of color, and I thought, okay, that works, that works, that works, that works. And then you just have to get into the nuances. We haven't started manufacturing anything yet. James Bobbin was in England, but he flew out. I created all my boards, of which I had vast numbers of them. And we just did like a big walkabout around this room. I had like 20 boards for him to look at, for the characters, the worlds, the armor, everything. And once we got the go-ahead, then I could go into a little bit more like definitive detail and pick out exactly, what fabric I was going to use, what colors I was going to use. And I did, had my illustrations created, and of course they have to go off for approval. And for our three leads, and I got nothing but extremely positive feedback for those kids, and that just really made me feel good, and I'm sure gave them a level of comfort, knowing that like, the other characters will be looked after as well. And it was good because we had to make 25 to 30 of each of their costumes to arrange, because we had the stunts.
Yeah.
We had smartly thought ahead to these kids that, were 12, 13, 15 years old, what was going to happen to them over the course of 8 months. And I'm sure Walker has grown 8 inches, between, he started off 5'2", and he finished like 6 months later at 5'6".
Wow.
Yeah.
Now,
and
now,
now
how do you cope with that? You know,
well, we made bigger, taller outfits. Like
wow.
we knew.
Okay, and in anticipation, yeah.
In anticipation.
That's something that I don't think a lot of people think about, you know, when you're dealing with younger people in shows, like an extended period of time. And especially now, you know, no one's making 26 episodes for a TV show in a season. They're doing 8, they're doing 10, you know, and then they'll come back 2 years from now or something and then start over. And the growing has already happened, but you were right in the midst of it.
I was right in the midst of it.
Wow.
But yeah.
And that's good.
And
I guess that's good for the
yeah.
characters too. The characters on a journey. Their life is on a journey. It's all working together. Yeah. Now, I'm wondering. Like, I always talk a lot about verisimilitude. It's my favorite word. I remember first seeing it on behind the scenes.
Okay, but I've heard of it. I think I knew what it meant once.
Well, verisimilitude it just means the quality of appearing real. Like, so if something, like, especially when you're working on a fantasy show, when I saw it, it was like, it might have been on the art department in the Superman the movie, the Christopher Reeve 1978 Superman. Richard Donner used that word a lot because the idea was you have to believe that Superman's real. Mm-hmm. And when you're dealing, you know, Percy Jackson, we've had so many young adult fiction now has been turned into, whether it's Harry Potter, obviously, whether it's Hunger Games, Maze Runner, Percy Jackson. The reality that you're creating of making a believable fantasy world is, to my mind, one of the great tricks of TV and cinema. If you can make somebody believe. Obviously, we've seen Lord of the Rings and Narnia translated in grand fashion. We have Rings of Power on. How do you guys, through the design, like your costumes, because I think Percy Jackson has a verisimilitude to it. It has a style. It has a feel. Mm-hmm. You believe it. You believe the world. And I'm just wondering, in terms of costuming, how, like, if you were too garish with your colors, it wouldn't work. You know, it's a balancing act. And for you, yeah, I was going to ask.
It's so true. Like, if you would take a look at the original, let's say, shirt that Percy's wearing, and of course I camera tested the fabric. We took that down so far, we over dyed it so far to mute it down. The same with Leah's purple corduroy jacket. I just knew I wanted purple because it looks so beautiful in a gray environment, and the purple and green go well together, and then, you know, the yellow with Grover. We dyed our fabric and over dyed it and over dyed it and over dyed it to get it to where, okay, well, that's reading purple, but when people see it, it just looks so dull, like, you know, it to the naked eye. But on camera, I think it was just right. I think it was just right. But it took a lot of effort to get it there. And I think our T-shirt for her was a purchase from the Gap, and it was all bright and cheery, and you know, really just, we took it down. I just kept saying, go further, go further, go further. And I think, you know, I think it enabled us, you know, to use those costumes in all those worlds because it worked outside. But in the underworld, if we had kept a color that might have been just fine outside because, you know, the sun can, you know, wash the brightness away.
Sure.
But in the underworld, it would have just been, ugh, it would have been like neon.
Yeah, and that's what I'm always fascinated by, especially with these fantasy worlds. Because if you don't get the costumes right, you're not going to believe the rest. If the characters themselves aren't believable, the rest of it falls apart. You know, you have to believe that those people exist. And I think you did a really good job across the board in the show, like making the costumes. I mean, it's not like you're not having fun either. You can have a lot of fun
Yeah.
with because you don't. That's why you watch fantasy. You don't want to see the real world. You want to see a little bit more. And I think
Exactly.
you've done a great job sort of towing that line, and really keeping a handle on it, but still there's a lot of beautiful design work throughout the series, and you and your team. So how many people are you employing on a show like that, in terms of, obviously you got your keys, but then after that, how many are you making everything for? Like you said, you bought a shirt at the Gap, but you're making stuff from scratch and you're building things. What is the size of a costume department on a show like Percy Jackson?
I think we had 32 people
Wow.
in the department. In terms of, like, in the dye department alone, because they had to dye so many t-shirts. It was just went on and on. In the dye department alone, we had 5 people. We also had specialty crafts, and we had 3 key people in that department. We had, I'm not even counting the people that worked on manufacturing the armor, because we sent it out to a company in Vancouver, to manufacture it. So they did the armor and the helmets. So that's a whole other group. In my sewing department, I had 3 cutters and probably 2, 4, 6 seamstresses, sometimes 7.
Wow.
And then, in my team, I had my assistant and 3 to 4 shoppers, and then the sort of administrative supervisory end, there were another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then I had another group of 3 people looking after all the background. But then they would have their day people come in when
Sure.
we had large numbers, and then I had 5 permanent people on set. So
It's
it
not
was
bad.
big.
Yeah, I was to say
But
it's not bad.
It was my, one of my gals from lunch that looked into the heavy organization of that, and my trusty assistant just ran everything like a machine. All I had to do was pick.
Was there
It
anything?
so good.
Was there anything on the show that surprised you? Was there any difficulties that you had to surmount that you weren't necessarily aware of at first? Like making armor, whether it's going to hold up. What materials are you going to have it really made out of metal? Is that going to be too? I mean, was there anything? I'm always curious when you're creating fantasy worlds. There's always difficulty in something.
Well, I knew that. I'll talk about two different things. One was the armor, and I knew that we were going to make it out of leather, because I had explored this one local company that had done molded leather before.
Oh, cool.
And they were a leather manufacturing company, but just that there were so many movies, and they had always in the past made, contemporary clothing for different movies. But we had been doing a lot of superhero episodics up here. And so they had taken on making a lot of the super suits and done very well at it. And so they decided to take on doing the armor. I had seen enough of their work to make me feel confident that they could pull it off. And they had 3 months lead in order to do it. I would say and we had Percy's Walker's sizes, so we had a Walker body double that would go in, and I went in so many times, and just figuring out how are we going to make this work, for somebody who's 5'4" and somebody else who's going to be 6'2", somebody who's got a 28 chest, so I had just devised a system with my assistant that worked really well. That was completely adjustable. Our only our big conundrum came with the helmets, because we needed to get, I forget what this is called, but the big
Yeah.
like faux mohawk that sits on top of the helmets. We had to get find a source for those, and the only place we could find them was in I don't know, some small horsehair company in India.
Wow.
And it took a lot. I mean, that's why I'm really glad we had the 12 weeks. But in the end, we ordered them from India. You know, it was a very slow process getting them, but they came. They all had to be dyed because they were ivory. So our dye department was dyeing these crests into the proper blue that had been approved,
Right.
into the proper red that had been approved. And then after they died, of course, they went all wriggly, so that we had to spray starch them and trim them and glue them into the helmet crest. But so that one was yeah, problematic. Well, not problematic, just a challenge.
Yeah,
And
yeah, you're right. You're finding and you're surmounting. I mean, each thing has a different challenge.
Yeah. And then the other one, which to me was absolutely the biggest challenge and the most rewarding and the most interesting, was doing the costume for Helena, who was the tree dryad.
Right.
Amazing piece of couturier work.
Yeah, it looks that looks incredible.
It is amazing. You cannot believe it close up. You cannot believe the hundreds of hours that went into that. And I credit like 95% of it to my so skilled cutter. But it's a combination of real fabric, silks that were dyed to colors based on mosses and bark and growth that were found in the forest where we were going to be filming. And so my dye department, you know, dyed silk that was in a range of colors appropriate to the forest. And then my cutter used a felting machine rather than a sewing machine that hammered layers of fuzzy moss-like fabric through the silk, punching it through.
Wow.
So that it looked like silk. And we knew that we wanted it sort of running in like riverlets. But when you look at it close up, it is a combination of real moss, fake moss, real bark, fake bark, leaves, everything.
What?
And my greatest joy was when we went to film Helena in the forest, and I had the locations department and the art department take photos of the tree that she was going to be up against, and we followed the lines of the tree onto the dress.
That's really cool.
A bodysuit built for her that was sent away to the company that was doing the special effects makeup, and they put rubberized pieces that, you know, they glued onto the neck and onto her head, onto her face. And when we had our first costume fitting, with all of the components, with hair and makeup in place, my dyer then took all of the components and hand painted on top of the makeup pieces that had been sent up, the special effects makeup pieces, readjusted the colors, you know, based on just everything blended together. And then when the character Helena showed up in the forest under beautiful low light with the sun sun peeking through, and I was standing beside the director and beside Dan Schatz, the producer, and Helena was standing there, and I could see that the position of her arm was such that it didn't align with the angle of the tree, and I remember James was just getting ready to roll, and I said, "Stop!" And I ran in, and then I pulled her arm back so that it would line up with the bark, and you couldn't yet see her, like you could not see her until she turned her head to meet Grover, and they did that first take. And I was standing right beside the producer, and I used an expletive, but I said, "That is awesome." Like it was so exquisite. So that was my biggest and most rewarding challenge, was working on those tree dryads. And
wow. I mean, that's a great story. I can't believe you and I have been talking for 55 minutes.
Wow.
It's crazy.
Okay.
I mean, and it's been great to talk to you. I could probably talk about this show for another hour, but we don't have another hour. No. So let me ask you this. I always ask people, obviously it seems like you had a great experience working on Percy Jackson. And I a lot of people always ask me, well, when I interview all the costume designers and the people that watch this show, always ask, how can I get into it? What if I wanted to follow that career path? And you obviously had an academic background. You talked to us about being in theater, and a lot of people discover their love of costuming in the theater. I've heard that a lot. Other people, it was a avocation from the time they were young. They were making clothes for their dolls and stuff, and they took it through academia and all that. What advice would you give somebody if they're looking to get into costume design today, if they wanted to think about pursuing it as a career? Is there anything you could impart? Any wisdom?
I have to say, first of all, that I love this career. Even if it was a bad project, I always found something to be rewarding, even if it was just the research. I would caution people, because it does take up all your time. So it's really difficult finding that, work-life balance. So you have to be prepared to just basically give up your life. I mean, you're just working such long hours, but it was all a joy. And I would say attributes to have are no ego. That really helps, because you're going to be meeting a lot of different egos, and it's all working, getting your ideas together for a common good. Like, it's almost like the best attitude to have is that the best idea wins. And that's what's so great about working in the film industry is that it's a complete collaboration. And, it's all these, ideas going off and boomeranging around. And it's like, somebody, squeaky voice in the background might say, yeah, blah, blah, blah. And you say, oh my God, that's a great idea. The other thing is to have a lot of energy. You absolutely have to have an undying, source of energy. And it's not about getting your stamp out there either. It's you're dedicated to the project.
Sure.
I would say that people want to get in it. I don't know how it necessarily works like in other centers, but in Vancouver, people start off working in commercials, volunteering in theater. Just seeing if they, can come and observe as a helper on a show. But it's very difficult to do that now. It's very hard to get on a set. It's just, things have just changed.
Yeah, it's a lot different now. It's a lot different now.
It is a lot different.
I mean, I started off as a PA, and I can't even imagine. I wouldn't even know where to go to get the job I got in my first job. You know, how to go back and do that. But you know, like you just said, you learn more. The first day I was on a movie set, I learned more about making movies than my entire education in film at school and college or whatever.
This is it. And I guess the best thing is just to network. Just try and find out, you know, who knows who. I would definitely say getting a background in, you know, fashion design or costume design really helps. But it's not the only way to go.
Right.
You know, with some of my assistants have backgrounds in, you know, archaeology. The Spanish language. You know,
right.
How does that work out? But then they, you know, one assistant came through like music videos.
Yep.
So I would just say try and find somebody who's in the biz and see, you know, if they can steer you in the right direction.
Are you on social media? Do you have like an Instagram account where people can see your work?
Well, yeah, no. I would say no.
Is that a sensitive subject?
But I may get one of it. My Instagram account is for my family and for
yeah, I just didn't know if you had a lot of people use it professionally too. So
I don't, but I just think, you know, now that I'm sort of, you know, nearing like the end of my career, then I think I would like to start sharing, you know, some.
Yeah, I mean, I think just look as
images.
I know for me, I love going through customers' Instagrams if they have a professional. Especially people, because you've worked on so many cool things, whether it was, we talked about genre stuff, but the comedy stuff you worked on a lot of things where I'm sure there's just pieces that people would like to see.
Yeah. No, I think I will do that. I'll probably set up a separate account just for, you know, viewing costumes, and I'll just keep my bad joke one for my family and friends.
Well, listen, Tish, I want to thank you for being here on the Designing Hollywood podcast. This was a great conversation, and Percy Jackson, the Olympians is a really great show. I was surprised by it. I wasn't planning on watching it until I sampled that first episode.
Yeah.
I do another YouTube show, entertainment news show, and when it came on, we're like, yeah, okay, we'll watch it. But then to watch it, I was like, wow, this is really good.
No, it was wonderful, and it all emanates from the top down. It's just a great group of executive producers and directors. It was lovely. It was so much fun. I enjoyed every single moment of it.
Well, it was really great to have you.
My pleasure.
Thanks a lot. A special thank you to founder and executive producer Martika Ibarra, co-founder, costume designer, the legendary Marilyn Vance, and of course, John Campea from the John Campea Show. Thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Tune in to the audio version wherever you listen to podcasts. I am, of course, your host, Robert Meyer Burnett, and you can find me on Instagram at rmburnett, or find me on Twitter at BurnettRM, or on YouTube at PostGeek Singularity. Thanks very much. Like, subscribe, and give us your comments. What would you like to see on the channel? Right down below. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode of Designing Hollywood.